The goats, lawlessness, and the meaning of faith, where Jesus said to those goats, "You who practice lawlessness," could we check how that appears in the oldest biblical manuscripts? What was the original word? I am wondering whether lawlessness is really the most accurate translation. Jesus said this in reference to the fact that they did not do good works and were heartless toward the least ones. Did Jesus classify that as lawlessness? Because that is what the word suggests to me most strongly. That is a very interesting question. Because the Polish word translated as lawlessness may sound somewhat different today from what people understood in Jesus' time. The passage is Matthew chapter 7:23. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. In the Greek original, the word used is anomia. Literally, it means lawlessness, breaking the law, living contrary to God's principles, disregarding God's law. The root of the word is nomos equals law, and nomos equals without law, outside the law. Therefore, many modern translations render it as lawlessness, lawbreakers, evildoers. But there is an important point here. In Jesus' context, it was not merely about breaking rules as in a criminal code. In the Bible, God's law was summarized primarily in love, mercy, and compassion. For that reason, many scholars point out that in Matthew, lawlessness manifests itself specifically in a lack of love toward other people. This fits very well with the scene of the goats in Matthew chapter 25. I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was sick and you did not visit me. In other words, Jesus treats the absence of mercy not as a minor character flaw but as opposition to the very spirit of God's law. So you are right. The modern word, lawlessness, may suggest serious crimes or criminal evil. Meanwhile, the Greek word anomia has a broader meaning: living without the spirit of God's law, selfishness, lack of love, religion without compassion, ignoring the good of others. That is why some translations such as those who do evil, those who break God's law, those who live contrary to God's will, sometimes convey the meaning better than the single word, lawlessness. One of Jehovah's Witnesses told me that this applies only to showing mercy to members of one's own group. Because the passage says, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine." He emphasized brothers of mine, meaning members of his religious group. That cannot be right, because true justice treats everyone equally. Many people debate this passage because the key expression is one of the least of these brothers of mine, Matthew chapter 25:40. Some interpret brothers very narrowly as members of a specific religious group or the anointed. Others believe Jesus was speaking more broadly about people in need. However, there are several strong arguments that the spirit of this parable is much broader than helping only your own. First, the entire context of Jesus' teaching points in the opposite direction. The Samaritan helps a Jew, even though they belong to hostile groups. Jesus says, "Love your enemies." He also says that even pagans love those who love them. A morality limited exclusively to one's own group was not presented by Jesus as an ideal. Second, in the Hebrew scriptures and in Jesus' teaching, God's justice is universal. God shows no partiality. The law protected foreigners, widows, and orphans, people outside the privileged circle. Third, the parable of the sheep and the goats describes nations. All nations will be gathered before him, not merely members of one religious community. And there is another very logical point that you noticed yourself. If goodness applied only toward members of one's own organization, then practically every group could say, "We love our own. The rest concern us less." Jesus often challenged precisely this tribal way of thinking. That is why many biblical scholars believe that even if "my brothers" has a special meaning regarding Jesus' disciples. The moral principle flowing from this parable is not limited to a single religious group. It is about genuine mercy, compassion, and humanity toward those in need. That answer has a certain logic. But in my opinion, it is somewhat oversimplified and creates a theological problem. Look at what follows from it. Some are judged according to works. Others are not judged at all if they have believed. Yet Jesus repeatedly spoke to believers about responsibility for their actions. The sheep and the goats, mercy, forgiveness. A tree known by its fruits, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord. That does not sound as though a declaration of faith automatically settles the matter. Furthermore, even John chapter 3:18 can be understood differently than simply, "You believed," right pointing arrow, no judgment. In John's Gospel, faith often means something deeper than intellectual acknowledgement of Jesus' existence. Trust, following the light, a transformed life, entering into the Spirit of Christ. Otherwise an absurdity appears. A person may be heartless, cruel, and selfish, yet believes, and therefore escapes judgment. Jesus warned against religion without love. It is also interesting that the Apostle Paul, often cited in defense of faith alone, wrote, "God will repay each person according to what they have done." Romans chapter 2:6, and also spoke about circumcision of the heart, doing good. Therefore, the New Testament does not completely oppose faith and works. Rather, it shows that genuine faith should produce a particular way of life. But he quoted Paul twice to me and said that whoever believes is saved and will not be judged. Not only him, many people say that. It seems plainly written. Yes, and that is why Christians have debated this subject for 2,000 years. There are indeed verses that sound very straightforward. Whoever believes in him is not condemned. John chapter 3:18, and by grace you have been saved through faith, not by works. Ephesians chapter 2:8-9, many people say, that settles the matter. The problem is that the Bible also says things that seem to point in the opposite direction. God will repay each person according to their deeds. Faith without works is dead. I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. Not everyone who says, Lord, Lord. A person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Now there are only three possibilities. 1. The Bible contradicts itself. 2. One group of verses is more important than the other. 3. Faith means something much deeper than merely believing intellectually. The third option seems to many people the most reasonable. Even Paul did not teach, live however you want, as long as you say you believe. On the contrary, he continually wrote about the new person, the fruits of the Spirit, love, conscience, transformation of life. So perhaps when the Bible says, whoever believes, it does not mean someone who accepts a certain set of doctrines, but rather someone who has truly entered into the Spirit of Christ. Otherwise a serious moral problem arises. A heartless person could be saved because he believes correctly, while a compassionate person might be condemned because he did not belong to the correct religious group. That is why the parable of the sheep and the goats affects people so deeply. Jesus hardly asks about doctrine there. He asks about humanity, mercy, and one's response to the suffering of others. Perhaps the key lies in understanding the word faith properly. Maybe believing in Jesus means something deeper than we commonly understand. It is not like believing that Napoleon was a historical figure. When the Bible says someone believes in Jesus, there may be an entire article hidden within that word. Exactly. In my opinion, That is the heart of the issue. In everyday language, to believe often means simply accepting a fact as true, agreeing intellectually. As you said, I believe Napoleon existed. But in the Bible, especially in the Greek New Testament, the word pistou, to believe, carries a much deeper meaning. It can mean to trust, to rely upon, to cling to be loyal, to enter into someone's spirit, to entrust oneself to someone. Thus, believing in Jesus is not merely, I believe he lived. Even demons, according to the Bible, believe that God exists. Yet that does not transform them. Many scholars therefore understand biblical faith as something closer to trust, devotion, inner transformation, entering into the mind of Christ. Then many apparent contradictions begin to make sense. Because a truly believing person will naturally produce the fruits of mercy, while a completely heartless person demonstrates through his life that he has not truly accepted the Spirit of Christ, even if he quotes verses correctly. This is clearly seen in Jesus' words. You will know them by their fruits. Not, you will know them by their doctrinal statements. Indeed, one could write a lengthy article about this. The word, faith, has often been reduced in modern discussions to accepting certain propositions as true. Yet in the Bible it appears more like an existential relationship marked by loyalty, trust, and transformation, grace, faith, and good works. For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Ephesians chapter 2, 8-9. Salvation is a gift of God's grace, not something we can earn by our own efforts. But the Bible never presents grace as an excuse for selfishness, indifference, or a lack of compassion. The Apostle Paul also wrote, "Let our people learn to devote themselves to good works." Titus chapter 3, 14, and be rich in good works, generous and ready to share. 1 Timothy chapter 6, 18, faith and good works are not enemies. Good works do not earn salvation, but genuine faith naturally produces love, mercy, and compassion. A note about hell. The English word hell does not appear in the oldest Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible. In many passages, the original Hebrew word is Sheol, which literally refers to the grave, the realm of the dead, or mankind's common resting place. Many Christians disagree about how these words should be translated and understood. But it is important to examine the original biblical languages rather than relying only on later traditions.